Welcome to EWTN News Nightly. I'm Colleen Carroll Campbell. Tonight's top stories. Supporters of gay marriage in Utah suffered setbacks this week, but say same-sex marriage soon will be legal nationwide. We'll talk to an economist and former libertarian activist about what that might mean for families and the growth of government. China's controversial one-child policy may be changing. We'll bring you expert analysis of that policy and its future, plus the story of one young woman whose parents defied the ban on births. And on Capitol Hill, House Speaker John Boehner is signaling interest in tackling immigration this session. We'll ask Bishop Gerald Bp.Kicanis of Tucson about the U.S. bishop's push for comprehensive reform and his response to Catholics who disagree. Thanks for joining us and Happy New Year. A report released today found that the worldwide number of Christians killed for their faith doubled in the past year. At least 2,100 Christians died. That's according to the World Watch List of Open Doors International, a nonprofit that advocates for persecuted Christians. The group found that Syria was the country where most Christians were killed last year, followed by Nigeria, Pakistan, and Egypt. North Korea was the most restrictive place for Christians. There, an estimated 50,000 to 70,000 Christians are imprisoned for their faith. Earlier today, officials with the Utah governor's office said the state will not recognize the hundreds of same-sex marriages performed there in the past 2 weeks. Those marriages had followed a December 20th ruling by a U.S. district judge in Salt Lake City who said the state's law banning gay marriage was unconstitutional. More than 900 gay and lesbian couples had responded to the ruling by filing for Utah marriage licenses, but the U.S. Supreme Court issued a temporary stop to those same-sex marriages on Monday to give Utah officials time to appeal the judge's ruling to a higher court. This week's developments in the Utah case have disappointed backers of gay marriage, but the past year has been a banner one for their cause. 7 states legalized same-sex marriage in 2013. That brings the total number of U.S. states allowing it to 16, plus the District of Columbia. Many say that's good news for the economy, as more marriages mean more weddings and thus more spending. But not all agree. I recently interviewed Dr. Jennifer Roback Morse, an economist who's taught at Yale, Cornell, and George Mason universities, and who now runs the Ruth Institute, a group that promotes traditional marriage. Take a look. Welcome, Jennifer. Thanks for joining me.
Well, thanks for having me, Colleen.
Jennifer, let's start with your background as an economist and a self-described libertarian, former libertarian activist. In the 70s, you were on the platform committee, right, of the Libertarian Party.
I was.
So how does a good libertarian wind up in the position of being a forceful defender of traditional marriage, which many libertarians see as an issue that the government should just get out of completely?
Well, you know, years ago when I was a graduate student, I would give little talks about libertarianism in people's homes, and so every once in a while somebody would say, "What about children?" And I would always say, "Oh, well, we'll cover that in a more advanced lesson." But the more advanced libertarian lesson never came for that subject. And so what I discovered when I became a mother myself, I discovered and realized that libertarianism was simply taking way too much for granted, because little guys don't get from helpless infant to rational economic man ready to make contracts with people and keep their word. People don't do that automatically. Something has to happen. And so it was my experience as an adoptive mother, and then a foster mother, and then a birth mother, all of those experiences that kind of showed me, hey, we're counting on moms and dads to get something done that's really important and literally can't be done by anybody else. If mom and dad don't do it, it ain't going to happen. So that was what prompted me to write my first book, Love and Economics, and it really propelled me into a whole realm of pro-family activism.
Now, with regard to same-sex marriage, you've argued that this is going to involve a huge transfer of power from civil society to the state. And that's really in some ways a counterintuitive claim, because a lot of folks think this is just about opening things up, being more free, being more liberal with the way that we define marriage. How could that entail more power to big government?
Well, it looks like you're more free on the front end going in because more people get to have weddings and more people get to have wedding certificates. But as things develop, there are things that the natural family can do that a same-sex couple cannot do without outside help, and namely the big one, of course, having a baby. And so in order to make same-sex couples look like they're the same as opposite-sex couples, you've got to somehow restructure the legal system to redefine what parenthood really means. And that is the piece that is going on right now, quietly, with or without the redefinition of marriage. There's a process going on of redefining parenthood. So that parenthood does not mean the male biological parent and the female biological parent, which is what traditional marriage is built around. Now, parenthood means the 2 people or 3 people or whoever who intends to have the child. Biology may or may not be involved. And so we're substituting a natural, for the natural institution of parenthood, where the state just writes down who the parent actually is. Now we've got this other whole complex notion where the state is involved in determining who counts as a parent, looking into people's lives to see if you really wiped enough noses and changed enough diapers, do you count as a parent? Is this what you really meant when you wrote this little agreement with this other person?
And how does that hurt children?
All those kinds of things are, that's in the lap of the state now. Well, what it means is that a child, that we're saying as a culture, that a child's connection with their biological parent is not so big of a deal. It's not that big of a deal. And so children's desire to know who they are, children's need to know who they are, their identity rights, their identity needs, those things are being set aside in the interest of adults having the kids that they want. So it's very different, for example, from adoption. So if you think about adoption, okay, you've got people there who are not biologically related to the child, taking care of the child. Oh, that must be the same thing. Well, no, it's not the same thing, because in adoption, everything about adoption just screams that biology actually matters. Because you get the biological parent there, you have to remove their parental rights before you can attach them to somebody else, to another child. And we respect and recognize children's rights in most situations to go figure out who their biological parents were. Adoptive kids have that, So, and that's being suppressed in the whole third-party reproduction process. So the third-party reproduction issue and the redefinition of marriage issue, to take the gender requirement out of it, those things are deeply, deeply intertwined, and people are acting like they're not even related, and that's crazy.
What do you expect to see then down the road? How will this affect children 10, 20, 30 years from now?
What we're seeing, what's developing is parenthood by contract. Okay, so 2 or 3 or more parties will get together and say, okay, we're together as lovers, and so, but for whatever reason we can't have a child, so we're going to have a contract with a third party to either.
What's the impact on that child
give us sperm or surrogacy or whatever. So what it means from the child's point of view is that the people who are taking care of them aren't their parents, and their need to know who their biological parents are, that need is going to be kind of suppressed and put aside, because after all, we're here to give the adults what they want and need, and that's how the legal system is being reoriented toward the interests of adults rather than children.
Almost out of time. Real quickly, what do you say to those who say, well, maybe marriage used to be about kids, but it hasn't been for a long time, so what's the danger of opening up a little wider and letting gays participate too?
Well, look, obviously not every marriage has children. That's clear. But every child has parents. And so to look at it the way you just did is really to stand the whole thing on its head. You still need an institution that connects kids with their parents. So there may be married people who aren't participating in it, I get that, but you've got to have some institution that connects kids with their parents, and we're now damaging the ability of marriage to be that institution, and we're going to end up replacing it with commerce and contracts rather than love and biology and those kind of very deep primal human attachments.
And you've said that this debate is part of a much larger debate and a much larger trend. Tell us more what you mean by that.
Well, if every child is a choice, that means that a child becomes an object if you want one and you're entitled to obtain an object, or a problem to get rid of if you don't want one. And we've always, of course, seen that with abortion. Problem with that is that if you're a choice and you're an object, you're inferior to your maker. You're inferior to your creator. So some people are going to come into existence as objects that belong to others. The Catholic view is that every child is a gift from God. That keeps us all equal. You're the equal with your parent, your child is the equal with you and everything. If some people are gifts and other people are choices, you know, we're really doing something to undermine the basic foundation of equality in our whole society.
Dr. Jennifer Roback Morse, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
We go now to Rome, where our Vatican correspondent, Alan Holdren, has the latest on reaction to some remarks that Pope Francis made last November. Alan, good to see you again. Headlines here say the Pope called for a rethink on Catholic attitudes towards same-sex unions. But what did the Pope actually say?
Well, he was speaking to the heads of religious congregations from around the world, Colleen, and he told them that they need to pay particular attention to the education of children that come from complex family situations. He pointed to the example that he'd learned about of a girl who was saddened to learn that her mother's girlfriend didn't like her. And he also went on to talk about the children of separated couples, separated parents, saying that the church needs to pay attention and not give them a, quote, vaccination against the faith. Now, Italian media in the days that followed the release of this interview, well, the Pope's words, said that the Pope was opening up to gay unions. Now, in the current Italian context, there is a lobby in the government that's trying to pass legislation to legalize gay marriage. So they grabbed onto the Pope's words in the general ballpark, and they tried to make them of use in their own context. Vatican spokesman Father Federico Lombardi set the record straight, saying that the Pope's words had evidently been manipulated.
Interesting. And Alan, we've also received confirmation from Pope Francis that he'll be making a pilgrimage to the Holy Land this spring. What can you tell us about the trip?
Well, from May the 24th to the 26th, the Holy Father, Pope Francis, is going to Jordan, to West Bank, and to Israel. He's going to be following in the footsteps of his predecessor, Paul VI, who did the same thing 50 years ago. This is just his second foreign trip, the young pontificate, and he's expected to make calls for greater unity between Orthodox Christians and the Catholic Church. He's also going to be entering into a zone that has been in unrest for generations, and we can expect him to call for peace while he's there.
Good to know. Thanks, Alan. We have to run to a break right now, but when we come back, we'll introduce you to a young woman whose birth defied China's one-child policy and who survived to now lobby against that policy. Stay with us. Welcome back to EWTN News Nightly. I'm Colleen Carroll Campbell. For 34 years, the Chinese government has officially barred millions of couples from having more than one child. In late December, China's legislature passed a resolution that will allow couples to have 2 children if one of the parents is an only child. Tonight, EWTN News Nightly's Jason Calvi introduces us to one girl who survived the old policy and says the new policy isn't much better.
Just by being born 17 years ago, Lisa Peng broke the law. And so in the eyes of the Chinese government, she was a nobody.
I didn't have a resident ID card, I didn't have a passport, and I didn't have the right to an education. So essentially, I don't have a future in China, and I'm not allowed to leave it either.
But Lisa and her family secretly escaped China and came to the United States when she was 5.
We left mostly because of my father's political activism, but because of my non-entity status, leaving China was very, very difficult and scary and harrowing.
Lisa was a second child in a country that limits family size to 1 child. China launched the population control policy in 1980. They say the program has helped the country's society and economy. Scholars at the Brookings Tsinghua Center say the policy has prevented 200 million births. According to the World Bank, about 118 boys are born to every 100 girls.
I know that I'm one of the lucky ones because there are still millions of girls who are either killed through the forced abortion policy or who have survived, but who lead a life with no future.
Now the country says they'll allow parents to apply to have a second child if one of the parents is an only child.
It's not really about extending the one-child policy to a two-child policy. It's not really about the numbers. At its core, it's about respecting human life.
As Lisa goes to college next year, she plans to continue fighting for human life and human rights. Jason Calvi, EWTN News Nightly.
Joining me now to discuss China's one-child policy and the broader issue of population growth are Steven Mosher, a social scientist and president of the Population Research Institute, and Jonathan Last, a senior writer for the Weekly Standard and author of What to Expect When No One's Expecting. Welcome, gentlemen.
Good to be here.
Nice to be here.
Thanks. And Steven, I'll start with you. You were in China living and researching, doing social science research there in 79 and 80, right as this policy was getting off the ground. What did you see?
Well, I saw women arrested for the crime, mind you, of being pregnant without permission. I saw them taken away from their homes and families. I saw them locked up in government holding pens. I saw them harangued from morning to night by senior party officials telling them they had no choice but to get abortions. Many of these women were 7, 8, and 9 months pregnant. I saw them taken by force on some occasions, crying on others, to local abortion clinics where they were given lethal injections into the abdomen that caused them to miscarry. In some cases where they didn't miscarry, I saw them given cesarean section abortions. Now, you can imagine the horror that I felt at being present when a woman who was 8 months pregnant, carrying a viable unborn child, was being given a cesarean section abortion to remove her now dead or dying baby. And then they were sterilized to boot so that they wouldn't bother the population control police or violate the one-child policy in the years to come. So it was a horrific, barbaric picture, which sadly is still happening today in China.
And let's talk a little bit about that, because I think there's a sense that this has relaxed. I mean, obviously there's been this change, this formal change, but also that the forced abortions and forced sterilizations have somehow abated in recent years. Is that the case from what you understand?
Well, there are still cases happening in China. Probably the intensity is not there as it was in the early years, because so many women have already been sterilized, have already been forcibly aborted, and cannot conceive children again. But we still have cases. I was in China not long ago. I interviewed women who had been forced to have abortions of second children, third children. I interviewed a woman who was forced to abort a first child because she was not of the legal age to have a child. So the fact that we're relaxing the policy around the margins, allowing some people to have a second child, that doesn't do anything for the Catholics in the Catholic villages in China that I visited, where they have 3 and 4 and 5 children because they hide their pregnant women from the population control police, and they have their children in secret. I mean, even if you went to a nationwide two-child policy, you're still going to have people who violate that policy, who want to have a third child, and who are going to be arrested and charged with the crime of being illegally pregnant and forcibly aborted. The Chinese government basically has taken over the control of the reproductive systems of everybody in China and is dictating to them how many children they can have and not have. You know, they're breeding the Chinese people like you would breed a herd of cattle. The government of China has no right to dictate to couples how many children they have or choose to have or choose not to have.
And Jonathan, I want to ask you about this. You know, to our Western ears, this sounds like a horrifying human rights violation, and yet there seems to be some grudging acceptance of this, even in places you wouldn't expect. Just in 2011, our own U.S. Vice President Joe Biden, speaking to an audience in China, said he fully understands the policy and wouldn't second guess it. So what's going on here? I mean, you've written, actually you both have, about the roots of the thinking behind this policy being not in China, but in the West.
Yeah, what people don't really understand is that this is atypical to socialism. If you look at the Soviet Union, from the time of the Second World War all the way through today, they celebrated having children. I mean, Nikita Khrushchev actually gave a big speech mocking the West's obsession with overpopulation, saying, you know, we need more Russian mothers and more Russian babies. So what's going on in China isn't really about socialism. It's about something different. And what it is it's about this ethos of overpopulation hysteria that began in the 1970s in the West and that got exported almost by accident into China. And as you're right, over here we actually almost celebrate it. You mentioned Joe Biden. You go through the litany of Western politicians who say that it's good, it's important that China has curbed its population. But it turns out it's been, as Steven said, just a slow motion humanitarian train wreck over there.
And let's talk, too, a little bit about the social consequences. Obviously, they're the personal consequences for the women, forcibly aborted, sterilized. But we are also seeing in China now a rapidly aging population, shrinking labor force, and a gender imbalance that's some estimated 25 million single Chinese men by 2020 won't be able to find a bride because there's so many more boys than girls because girls having been aborted at higher rates.
Absolutely. And so what you have is this dissonance between people in the West celebrating the one-child policy, and then demographers inside China over the last 10 or 15 years or so have been warning, look at all these problems we have ahead of us on the horizon because we've depleted our human capital. And so we've had demographers in China arguing to the extent that they can, to the extent that they really feel safe doing so, trying to push the country to get rid of and roll back the policy. And that is part of what we have seen. But it seems as it isn't enough, I don't think. And certainly one of the interesting things here is that China is going to find out whether or not they have, over the course of these two generations, just atomized people's desire for children. There was a study done in 2006 in the Jiangsu province looking at ideal fertility. And so they asked women down there, if you could have as many kids as you wanted to, how many would you like? And the number came out, the average was 1.46. And so having lived under this terrible regime, you see people's spirits just broken. And so you wonder, even if you roll it back, what's going to be left?
This may turn out to be a collective suicide pact. It's an odd thing that the most populous country in the world is now facing a nationwide labor shortage, is now facing 40 million young men who will not be able to find brides because their brides have been killed in utero or as little girls, where you have the buying and selling of women like chattel because there are too few women to go around, where you have cross-border trafficking in women from North Korea and Vietnam, little girls being brought in, sold into sexual slavery or sold as wives. These are all terrible tragedies, and I'm afraid the biggest tragedy is yet to come, the euthanizing of the elderly in large numbers. Because, after all, they're retired, they're not productive, they're a burden on society, and I think the Chinese Communist Party will choose to get rid of them in the same way they've chosen to get rid of hundreds of millions of unborn Chinese babies.
It was interesting just this summer that China passed a law ordering children to visit their aging parents, which in a society so shaped by the Confucian concept of filial piety is amazing that now there have to be laws. Steven, real quickly, we're almost out of time, but what do the population alarmists get wrong when they look at a certain number of people and say that's, more people equals greater scarcity of resources? What are they missing? Because most of their dire predictions have never come true, right?
Well, they've been wrong every time, but that doesn't stop them from continually pushing back their disaster into the future. They fail to see people as producers. They see people only as consumers. And in the case of China, the Chinese government has eliminated hundreds of millions of the most productive, enterprising, smart people the world has ever seen. And they think they're better off. They've lost their collective minds. They've made themselves poor, not richer.
Steven Mosher, Jonathan Last, thank you both for joining me.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Catholic dioceses across the country are celebrating National Migration Week right now by focusing on the plight of undocumented immigrants, refugees, and human trafficking victims. Meanwhile, on Capitol Hill, House Speaker John Boehner reportedly told colleagues today that Republicans are working on a list of principles for immigration reform. I recently asked Bishop Gerald Kicanis of Tucson about the U.S. Bishop's continuing push for reform and what it means for rank-and-file Catholics. You're in Tucson. You're very much in a place where this is a real issue for folks every day, living with the consequences of, immigration and lack of reform or the various issues that come up. How do you answer Catholics who say, okay, but this is a matter of prudential judgment, the specifics of immigration legislation. Therefore, I don't really have to worry about what the bishops have to say on immigration the way I have to listen, say, when they talk about abortion. How do you respond to that?
Well, it's important, I think, as bishop in a state like Arizona, which is at the epicenter of the immigration question, it's important to listen to people who are upset, who are discouraged, who are confused by what bishops are saying, so that we can help to clarify and help them to see why it is that the Church speaks up so forcibly for comprehensive immigration policy reform. we see it as a moral imperative. So it is an issue of deep concern for bishops. Why? Because, first of all, families are being disunited, and this is worrisome for us in the church because the core of our life in Christ is our family relationships. Secondly, there are so many deaths in our desert. We've had 2,000 deaths since the year 2000. People who have come trying to find a decent way of life, a way of life that will care for their families, and they have suffered because of that desire to find a better way of living. I remember visiting a young man, 17 years of age, in one of our hospitals in Tucson. His legs had been totally severed. He came from Chiapas. He didn't really speak Spanish, but the native indigenous language. And he wanted to come here because his mother was a single mother. She had 7 children. From how he described her, I think she probably was a woman quite emotionally disturbed. He came here trying to connect with his uncle because he wanted to help his mom and his family to survive. And now is a person with disability that will have to return to Mexico and have a terribly difficult life. When a person wants to find an economic opportunity for himself or his family, it would be great if there were legal ways that people could do that. No one condones illegal entry into a country. A country needs to know who's coming in, who are there in their country. But right now our laws are so restrictive, and most people look upon our immigration policy in the U.S. as a broken system. What the bishops are calling for, let's look at what is broken and try to fix it. And our hope is that the Congress and President will not walk away again from passing comprehensive immigration policy reform. You know, in Tucson, we have many of our business community are really calling upon our Congress and President to resolve this question. These are Republicans, these are Democrats, people who see that the system is not working, and we have to find a better way to respond to the needs our country has for workers, the need to try to bring out of the shadows the 11 or 12 million people. And in Tucson we see that there are people who are wonderful community members who now are living in the shadow, unable to really bring their gifts to bear. And so I think the bishops do see this as a moral imperative. It has business ramifications, economic ramifications, civil society ramifications. But most important for us, there are moral implications, especially the need to unify families, not separate families, and the need to end the deaths in the desert so that people who want a better way of life can find that legally and not have to make this treacherous journey through the desert.
Finally tonight, he came to see the Pope and he got the ride of his life. Father Fabian Baez, a priest from the Pope's hometown of Buenos Aires, was in the thick of the crowds at St. Peter's Square today when the Holy Father spotted him. Francis surprised the crowd by asking his driver to stop so Father Baez could jump the barricade and join him on the Pope-mobile. Baez said later he was, quote, very moved and kept thinking, Mamma mia, what am I doing here? That's all for tonight. Be sure to like us on Facebook and follow us on Twitter. And you can catch our entire program again on EWTN News Nightly's YouTube page. I'm Colleen Carroll Campbell, and on behalf of all of us here at EWTN News Nightly, thank you for watching. We'll see you next time.